Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The air inside the living room was stale, an unmoving mix of spilled beer, cigarette smoke, and the lingering scent of burnt food that had crusted onto the stovetop days ago. Princess sat with her knees to her chest on the couch that sagged in the middle, the fabric prickling against her skin through the holes in her leggings. The television blinked silently. The remote lost again, probably under one of the couch cushions or maybe in the kitchen where her mom last flung it. The sounds coming from the bedroom down the hall were muffled but unmistakable. Laughter, glass clinking, a low man's voice she didn't recognize. Her mother's voice, slurred and rising in pitch, floated above it all, sharp, careless, far away. Princess tightened her arms around her knees. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. There had been no groceries, only stale cereal crumbs at the bottom of a box she'd scraped with her fingers. She watched the hour change on the microwave across the room, 11:07 p.m. Her school uniform was still damp from where she tried to hand wash it in the bathtub. Tomorrow was a school day, but no one cared whether she showed up or not. A door creaked open down the hall. She froze as footsteps thudded toward the kitchen, heavy and unsteady. A man she hadn't seen before, tattooed arms, shirtless, beer can in hand, stumbled through, giving her a long, sloppy look before rummaging through the kitchen drawers. "You her kid?" he asked, without even looking directly at her. She didn't answer. He belched, then laughed to himself. "Shame," he muttered before walking back toward the bedroom. Her mom's giggle trailed after him. Princess exhaled, but her body stayed tense. She hated the quiet that followed those moments. The house always felt like it was listening, walls too thin, shadows too deep. At 16, she knew better than to expect safety under that roof. She had learned the signs, the long gaps between her mother's jobs, the men who came and went, the missed parent-teacher meetings, the unopened bills on the counter. Sometimes her mom would be sweet, bringing home takeout or brushing Princess's hair. But those moments were brief, like the last warmth of the sun before a long, cold night. Later that night, when the voices from the bedroom turned to shouting, and a crash echoed through the house like a slap across the walls, Princess quietly got up. She moved with the instinct of someone used to not being noticed. Her school bag was already packed. It had been for weeks. She opened it, double-checked for her ID, the little money she'd saved from helping a neighbor with her cleaning, and a change of clothes. No noise, no tears, no note. Her fingers lingered on the peeling paint of the front door for a second longer than they should have, just enough to ask herself if this was a mistake. But then the shouting started again, her mom cursing, something slamming, and the answer came as clear as a whisper, no. She stepped outside barefoot, the pavement cool under her soles, the wind cutting through the thin fabric of her hoodie. The door closed behind her with the softest click, the kind that ends one life and starts another. Princess didn't sleep much the first week she left home. She drifted from benches to bus stops, careful not to linger too long in any one place. The streets were louder at night than she had expected, siren wails cutting through the dark, muffled arguments from alleyways, and the constant hum of the city pressing in on her. Her small backpack became her lifeline. Inside it, she kept everything she owned, a wrinkled hoodie, a cracked phone with no data, half-used deodorant, and a thin wallet with barely enough money for 2 meals a day. Her school ID, tucked into a side pocket, was the only thing that still carried her name, Princess Adideo, in clean block letters. Every morning she washed her face in public restrooms, tying her hair up tightly, trying to look older than she was. She would sit at train stations just to feel the heat from vending machines, and keep her eyes open so she wouldn't dream about food. She found temporary shelter in a rundown youth center tucked between a closed-down laundromat and a betting shop. A girl named Tenny, just 2 years older, and with the same quiet, guarded look in her eyes, introduced her to a counselor there. He asked her questions she didn't want to answer, but his voice was soft and he didn't push. Through the center, she got access to a shared room, a cot near a window that didn't quite close, but it was safe. There was a kitchen that always smelled like burnt toast and instant noodles, and a chart taped to the wall that rotated chores between the residents. Princess took the earliest cleaning shift, 5:30 a.m., just so she could be up before the others. It gave her time to think, to move slowly, to exist without having to explain herself. She took on odd jobs, helping vendors at the market, sweeping salons, anything that paid even a little. Some days she earned just enough for bread and sachet water, but it was hers. She earned it, and she made it stretch. It was on one of those market mornings, wiping down dusty plastic tables at a buka, that she met Jede. He worked across the street at a phone accessory stall, always in worn jeans and a cap too big for his head. He was quiet like her, always reading or scribbling into a beat-up notebook. For weeks, they didn't speak, but sometimes their eyes met when she looked up from scrubbing. One afternoon, as the sun dipped and vendors began packing up, he walked over and left a pastry wrapped in newspaper on her table. "You look like you forgot to eat," he said, then turned and walked away. She stared at the food for minutes before touching it, suspicious, hesitant, but when she finally tasted it, it was warm and sweet. After that day, he began showing up more often, always with something small to share. Their words were few at first, short exchanges like leaves brushing in passing wind. But slowly, cautiously, she began to smile again. Not the kind you wear to survive, but the kind that grows, quietly, from hope. The first time Princess let Jede walk her home, she didn't mean to. It had rained earlier that evening, and the streets were slick with puddles that reflected city lights like scattered glass. She had stayed late helping a tired vendor pack up, and by the time she was done, the buses had stopped running. Jede appeared from nowhere, like he had been waiting nearby all along, holding a broken umbrella and 2 meat pies in a nylon bag. She hesitated when he offered to walk with her, but the streets were darker than usual, and something about his silence felt safer than being alone. They didn't talk much during the walk, except for when he pointed out a cat sitting under a leaking pipe, its eyes glowing in the dark. When they reached her building, she thanked him quietly and hurried inside, pretending she didn't see him watching until the door closed behind her. That night, lying on her cot with damp socks and a full stomach, she thought about how strange it felt, being looked at without being sized up, being spoken to without feeling stripped. Their friendship grew like vines between bricks, slow, steady, and unnoticed by most. Jede would wait by her corner after shifts, sometimes with food, sometimes with a small book or a folded note scribbled with a quote or joke. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't pry. That was how he earned her trust. Over time, he learned she hated loud noises, loved watching clouds move, and always double-checked her door lock twice. She learned that he lived with an uncle who barely noticed him, that he used to draw until life made it feel pointless, and that he read poems to escape his own mind. When he first held her hand, it was at a bus stop, both of them shaking from the cold and pretending not to notice how tightly they gripped. Their relationship wasn't sudden or loud. It bloomed in silence and exchanged looks across market stalls and shared meals and laughter that started slow and ended full. By the time Princess turned 19, she had saved just enough to move into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town. Jede helped her carry in the mattress and the plastic kitchen shelves. The walls were bare, and the tap leaked when turned too far, but to her it felt like a kingdom. They took turns cooking, noodles, boiled yam, sometimes rice when they could afford it. Every corner of the house began to hold a memory, the stain on the wall from their first failed attempt at painting, the dent in the kettle she dropped while laughing, the poem he wrote on the back of a takeaway box and stuck on the fridge. The proposal wasn't grand. One morning, as they sat eating akara and pap on the floor with no chairs, Jede looked at her and said, "Let's stop pretending we aren't already each other's home." She stared at him for a moment, then smiled so wide it hurt. "Okay," she whispered. And that was it. They got married in a modest civil ceremony a few months later, just them and two witnesses. No music, no crowd, just quiet vows and trembling hands, two souls choosing each other, with nothing to prove but everything to hope for. It was a humid Saturday afternoon, the kind where sweat clung to skin even in the shade, and Princess had just finished haggling over fresh tomatoes in the open-air market. Zara was asleep in a carrier strapped to her back, her soft breath warm against Princess's shoulder. Malik, now 4, tugged at the hem of her dress, chewing on a puffed snack he had been bribed with to keep from wandering off. The market buzzed with life, traders yelling over one another, customers ducking beneath brightly colored umbrellas, the smell of grilled corn mixing with hot oil and diesel fumes. Princess moved with practiced ease, ducking past makeshift stalls and sidestepping spills of palm oil on the ground. She was halfway through her list when something strange rippled through her, a tight pull in her chest, like her body had sensed a shift before her eyes had time to understand it. When she looked up across the narrow aisle of stalls, time slowed. There, standing beside a used clothing vendor, was a woman in a faded pink wrapper and cracked sandals. Her skin hung loosely over bones, her lips dry and her eyes sharp, sunken, and familiar. Princess froze. The woman was laughing at something the man beside her said. He was tall, gaunt, and jittery, his eyes darting from face to face like he expected someone to chase him. He had one arm loosely wrapped around the woman's shoulders, protective and possessive all at once. The woman leaned into him, too comfortably, like she belonged there. Princess's throat tightened. It had been years. That woman was her mother, or what was left of her. Her once full cheeks were now hollow, her skin sallow, and her hair clumsily tied with a ragged scarf. But Princess knew those eyes. She had seen them in the mirror too many times not to recognize them now. 1,000 unspoken things rushed forward, anger, confusion, longing, shame. She didn't know whether to run or call out. Before she could decide, her mother looked up. Their eyes locked. In that 1 second, the market noise faded, and it was as if the world held its breath. Her mother blinked slowly, her face unreadable, no gasp, no step forward, no recognition in the way a mother should have for her daughter. And then she turned back to the man and walked away. Princess stood still for a long time, Malik's small hand still in hers. She could feel her heart pounding under her skin, as if it wanted to break free. The tomatoes she had bargained so hard for slipped from her fingers and rolled into the dust. A woman nearby muttered something, annoyed, but Princess didn't hear. She bent down slowly, more from reflex than intent, and picked up the fallen tomatoes one by one. Malik asked her something, voice muffled by a mouthful of crumbs, but she couldn't respond. Her mind was far from the market now. She had spent so many years building walls around that memory, her mother's face, her voice, the pain of leaving, but now all of it had cracked open in the space of a glance. She thought she'd buried that part of her life, but seeing her again, alive and somehow still surviving, opened something dangerous inside her. That night after the kids had been bathed and tucked into bed, and Jide was dozing off on the couch, Princess stood at the window and stared into the city lights. Her arms were crossed, her jaw clenched. One question kept rising in her mind like a drumbeat she couldn't silence. Why now? Princess didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Jide in the quiet, the ceiling fan spinning shadows across their small bedroom, while her mind kept circling the same thought, she's still alive. That image of her mother, drawn, distant, clinging to a man with sunken eyes, wouldn't leave her. By morning, Princess had made up her mind. She needed to find her. Not for closure, she had long given up on that, but for something deeper, something she couldn't name. She didn't tell Jide right away. Instead, she used the internet at the community library during Zara's nap hours, searching for shelters, rehabilitation centers, anything that might have records. Nothing came up. The city was too wide, too full of people who vanished between its cracks. Finally, she took a bolder step. One of the boys who worked at the market, a scrappy teenager who sold gum and sachet water, agreed to help for a fee. 2 days later, he pointed her toward a cramped building behind a car wash, where, he claimed, the woman from the market lived. The building was barely standing. The staircase creaked like it might collapse beneath her with every step. The hallway reeked of kerosene and urine, the paint peeling in long, tired strips. Princess hesitated at the door, number 2B, her fingers hovering just above the frame. There were noises inside, laughter, the rattle of plastic, a cough. She knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing her mother, thinner than she remembered, but with the same old glint in her eyes. She didn't look surprised. "Ah," she said, as if Princess had only been gone a week. Look who finally remembered she had a mother. The man from the market, Jay, he introduced himself, watched from the corner of the room, his smile too wide, his pupils too dark. Princess stepped in carefully. The flat smelled of stale smoke and sweat. A cracked TV played a movie on mute. Her mother spoke with quick, half-formed sentences, jumping from one thought to another, as if trying to keep control of the conversation. Princess tried to offer help, rehab options, clean clinics, even a chance to stay at her place, but her mother laughed, sharp and bitter. "You think you're better than me now?" she spat, leaning on the wall like she needed it to stand. Jade didn't say much, just watched, his fingers twitching against his leg. Princess left after 20 minutes, her throat dry and her chest aching. 4 days afterward, Princess couldn't shake the visit. Every time she picked up Zara or helped Malik with his counting books, a part of her felt like she was living two lives, the one she had built and the one she had left behind. She began making excuses to check on her mother, bringing food sometimes, money other times, always hoping she'd agree to get help. Jade noticed the change, of course. He wasn't the kind to shout, but his silences grew heavier. One evening, as she packed a bag of groceries to take over, he asked, "What are you trying to fix exactly?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. Maybe she wasn't trying to fix her mother. Maybe she was trying to fix the piece of herself that had learned to survive by forgetting. But every visit ended the same, her mother half high or distracted, Jay always nearby, too comfortable, too quiet. Princess tried to pull her mother back, gently, with patience, even with anger. But it was like reaching for someone underwater. They'd surface for a moment, just long enough to give you hope, then sink again without warning. And slowly, painfully, Princess began to realize something she hadn't wanted to admit. Not everyone wants saving. The first real fight Princess and Gede had wasn't loud, but it left the air between them heavier than silence ever had before. It started with her coming home late again. The kids had already eaten and were half asleep on the couch, wrapped in their favorite blankets, the living room dim with the flicker of the television screen. Jide was seated at the table, a plate of cold beans untouched in front of him. Princess closed the door quietly behind her, trying not to wake the children, but the moment their eyes met, she knew the stillness wasn't just from waiting, it was from worry turned into resentment. "You were with her," he said, not a question, just a fact he had long grown used to accepting. She nodded slowly, placing her keys in the chipped bowl by the shelf. "She wasn't feeling well," she murmured, her voice already defensive. He didn't argue. He just looked down, and after a pause, asked softly, "And were you?" That question cut deeper than she expected. In the weeks since Princess reconnected with her mother, things in her own home had begun to shift. Meals were quicker, less shared. Conversations with Jid were brief, always drifting back to the subject they never quite finished. Malik had started acting out in small ways, knocking over his water cup at dinner, refusing to sleep without being held, and Princess noticed, but never addressed it fully. She kept thinking, once I get Mum stable, I'll have time again. But stability was nowhere in sight. Her mother's condition was getting worse. On some days, she didn't recognize Princess at all. On others, she talked like they had never been apart, asking strange questions about old neighbors who had long moved away. Jay's presence remained constant, always lounging in a corner, always half watching her with something behind his eyes that made Princess uneasy. Once, she caught him rifling through her grocery bag when her mother had fallen asleep. When she said something, he shrugged. "Just checking the dates," he claimed. She didn't believe him, and yet she kept returning. One afternoon, Princess arrived to find the door of the flat half open. Her heart jumped. She pushed it wide and stepped inside slowly. Her mother was sprawled on the worn couch, her breathing shallow, a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead. Jay was nowhere to be seen. The place looked different, darker, dirtier, and colder than usual. Bottles were scattered across the table. Her mother stirred but didn't open her eyes. Panic bloomed in Princess's chest as she knelt beside her, shaking her gently. No response. She called Jide first, her hands trembling. He arrived within 20 minutes, without a word, just a look. They got her mother to a nearby clinic, paid for the consultation, and waited in the hallway under the humming tube lights. The nurse said it was a bad reaction. Something in the mixture of substances she'd taken had been off. Lucky she got here when she did, the nurse muttered. As they sat on the cold bench, Ged finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just hurting you anymore. It's spilling over. Onto me. The kids. You need to see that." Princess wanted to deny it, wanted to say she had it under control, but her throat burned, and no words came. All she could do was stare ahead, her reflection caught in the glass panel of the clinic door, a woman torn between past and present, watching both crumble in her hands. The days after the clinic visit blurred together. Princess tried to withdraw, but guilt tethered her to her mother's life like a thread she couldn't cut. She told Gede she would stop visiting for a while, just to reset, she had said, forcing a smile, but the truth was, she didn't believe she could stay away. The image of her mother lying there, frail, sweating, breath rasping in shallow bursts, haunted her. Something about the episode felt wrong. Too sudden, too severe, and Jay's absence that day sat in her mind like a stone she couldn't swallow. She began to notice the small things more, how he was always the one to answer her knock, how her mother's demeanor shifted when he entered the room, the way her skin seemed paler, her speech more slurred on days he had been around the most. Princess found a plastic cup by the bedside once, still half full of a thick liquid she didn't recognize. It smelled sweet, almost syrupy. Her gut twisted. That night, long after putting Zara and Malik to bed, she sat in the dark with her phone in hand, searching for symptoms, signs, causes. Her screen lit up with articles she could barely process, but one thing kept appearing again and again, intentional overdosing through spiked drugs. She returned a few days later, this time unannounced and earlier than usual. The door was unlocked. Jay wasn't there, and her mother was curled up on the couch in a cardigan far too thick for the weather. She looked worse. Yellowish skin, trembling fingers, her eyes sunken deeper. Princess sat next to her, quietly, then spoke carefully. "Mom, has Jay ever given you something different? Something you didn't ask for?" Her mother blinked slowly, then looked away. "You think I don't know what I'm taking?" she said with a dry chuckle. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive." But there was something uncertain in her voice, something that cracked through the bravado. Princess pressed on. "What about that drink in the cup? It didn't look like anything you usually have." Her mother didn't answer. Instead, she turned the volume up on the TV, though nothing was playing. Princess sat in silence for a while, watching her mother's thin hand fidget with the hem of her sleeve. Before she left, she took the cup, wrapped it in a nylon bag, and carried it home. She didn't know what to do with it, who to call, where to take it, but she kept it in a locked drawer, just in case. A week later, the truth began to unravel. Jada had taken it upon himself to do some digging. A friend of his worked as a security guard at a rehab center and had connections to a few street clinics. Through whispered names and old files, they traced Jay back to another woman, one who had died 6 months earlier under suspicious circumstances. Same symptoms, same patterns. That night, Jade sat across from Princess in their living room, a printout in his hand. "It's him," he said quietly. "I don't know what he's after, but this isn't just addiction anymore. He's dangerous." The room felt smaller, heavier. Princess didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply closed her eyes and nodded. The warning signs had been there all along. She just hadn't wanted to see them. Her love for her mother had blinded her to the sickness that had crept in under the guise of care. Now, with everything at stake, her family, her sanity, her past clawing its way into her present, she knew there could be no more soft visits, no more silent watching. The next time she knocked on that door, it would be with purpose, with proof, and with the resolve to finally choose herself, even if it came at a price. Princess moved differently after that night. Every step she took felt calculated, deliberate. Gone was the guilt that used to cloud her judgment. In its place was a quiet urgency, a sharpness she hadn't felt in years. She no longer approached her mother's place with the tentative knock of a daughter trying to reconnect. Instead, she watched from a distance. A borrowed camera from Jade's friend helped her document things she'd been too blind to see before. Jay's constant pacing outside the building, the short visits from strange men at odd hours, the bruises on her mother's arm that weren't there the week before. Princess spent her evenings reviewing blurry footage and notes, her hands cold even under a blanket. When she showed Jade a clip of Jay mixing something into a cup of tea before handing it to her mother, he said nothing, just exhaled and nodded once. They both knew now what they were dealing with. This wasn't neglect. This was methodical, cruel control. And her mother, too deep into dependency, too tangled in years of survival, couldn't see it for what it was. But Princess saw everything clearly now. She reached out to a social worker she'd met at a community outreach program months ago, back when she thought her volunteering could help heal the parts of her past that still hurt. The woman's name was Tocci, and her voice over the phone was calm, almost skeptical, until Princess laid out everything she had: photos, recordings, notes, medical records from the clinic. Tocci agreed to meet. They spoke for hours at a quiet cafe near the station. Tocci listened without interrupting, occasionally asking sharp, purposeful questions. "Are you ready for how messy this might get?" she asked at the end, her eyes steady. Princess didn't flinch. "I've lived through worse," she said. And she meant it. Within the week, a quiet investigation had begun. Tocci involved the local authorities discreetly. No alarms, no warning. Just slow, steady moves toward truth. It was during this time that Princess noticed a shift in her mother. More fatigue, increased confusion, like her body was beginning to give up even before help could arrive. And Jay, growing bolder, stayed around more often, answering the door with fake charm and eyes that never stopped calculating. The morning it all came to a head, Princess hadn't planned to visit, but something gnawed at her gut, a quiet urgency she couldn't shake. She left the kids with Jade, tucked the small voice recorder in her pocket, and headed out. When she arrived, the door was ajar. Her mother was on the floor, gasping, her hands trembling violently. A mug lay shattered beside her. Jay hovered above her, a bottle in one hand, yelling though his voice cracked not with panic, but with frustration. Princess didn't think. She stepped in, pushed past him, and knelt beside her mother. "What did you give her?" she screamed. Jay backed away, eyes wide, the bottle slipping from his fingers. Her mother blinked slowly, barely conscious. Behind them, Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Toc and two plainclothed officers, their timing terrifyingly perfect. Jay tried to run, but one officer grabbed him roughly. The bottle was tested on the spot. Traces of poison. Everything unraveled so quickly after that. As they cuffed him and read his rights, Princess held her mother's hand, shaking. Her mother turned her head just slightly, eyes glassy. "You came," she whispered. Princess bit down the tears, nodding. "I did." But deep inside, she feared it was already too late. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something floral, like someone had tried too hard to mask the presence of illness. Machines beeped softly in the background, their rhythms too steady, too clinical for the weight of what was unfolding. Princess sat beside the bed, her hand wrapped around her mother's, now paper-thin and bruised from too many needles. It had been 3 days since Jay's arrest. 3 days of updates from doctors delivered with practiced detachment. The poisoning weakened her organs. Combined with the prolonged substance abuse, they didn't need to finish the sentence. Princess had heard enough in the way their eyes shifted, in the pauses before they spoke. There was no easy recovery coming. She had spent those 3 days sleeping in short bursts on the pull-out chair, waking at every twitch, every shift of air, afraid her mother might slip away in silence. And yet there was a strange peace now. Her mother was conscious more often, though frail. Her words came slowly, weighted with years of things unsaid. One afternoon, when the sunlight fell through the window just right, painting golden streaks across the bed, her mother asked, "Do you hate me?" The question hung in the air, fragile and sharp. Princess didn't answer immediately. She stared at the woman before her, the person who had abandoned her in childhood, who had chosen escape over motherhood, who had been both victim and architect of her own destruction. But she also saw the woman who had laughed so brightly in old memories, who had once sewn clothes by hand, who now looked at her with the eyes of someone who finally understood the cost of it all. "No," Princess said quietly, "but there were years when I did." Her mother nodded slowly, like she expected that. "I wasn't ready to be anyone's mother," she whispered, "and I couldn't save myself." The words weren't excuses, they were confessions. That night, as the room dimmed and sleep settled gently over the hospital wing, Princess sat with her head beside her mother's hand, letting the silence speak for them both. There was no forgiveness, not fully, but there was something close to it. The next morning, it was over. A nurse woke Princess gently, her face drawn. "She passed in the early hours," she said softly. There was no dramatic moment, no last breath held in suspense. Just a stillness that replaced life so completely, it was undeniable. Princess stood in that stillness for a long time, looking at the empty shell of the woman who had given her life, and also left her to fight for it alone. The grief didn't come all at once. It trickled in, filling the spaces she didn't know were hollow. The funeral was small, quiet. Jide held her hand the entire time, and Zara clung to her dress, while Malik asked innocent questions that no one knew how to answer properly. A week later, a lawyer contacted her. Her mother had left behind a will. Princess didn't know what to expect. There had been so little to begin with, but when she sat down in the lawyer's modest office and heard the details, she wept for the first time. Her mother had left everything to her and the grandchildren. A modest bank account, a piece of land back in her village, letters, 3 of them, one for Princess, one each for the kids. The words were shaky, scribbled, but honest. "I didn't know how to love you the way you needed, but I always wanted to." Princess folded the letters gently, held them close to her chest, and for the first time in her life, let herself mourn the woman her mother was, and the woman she never got to be. The weeks after the funeral passed in quiet waves. Some days felt unbearably long, others vanished before Princess could grasp them. Life, as it often does, demanded continuation, meals to be made, children to bathe, school runs to complete. Yet beneath the routines, something inside her had shifted. The weight of her mother's death wasn't just sorrow. It was an unraveling of every version of herself she had learned to hold together. The broken teenager who had left home with nothing but a backpack. The guarded woman who had taught herself to never look back. And now, the mother who saw traces of her own pain in her daughter's eyes and swore never to pass it on. Princess moved through her day slower, more aware of every detail. She read her mother's letter often, especially on the days she doubted if she'd ever fully heal. It didn't fix anything, but it helped. Just knowing her mother had tried, even in the end, to leave something good behind. One Saturday morning, Princess took the children to see the land in the village. It was a quiet place, surrounded by old trees and the soft sounds of birdsong. The path to the land was overgrown, as if it hadn't been walked in years, but something about it felt sacred. Malik ran ahead with excitement, Zara skipping clumsily behind him. Princess walked slowly, her fingers brushing the tall grass, breathing in the unfamiliar scent of wild earth. The land wasn't large, but it felt full of possibility. She could almost see what it might become, maybe a small retreat for her family, or a simple house where she could one day grow old without the noise of the city. The villagers recognized her mother's name. Some spoke with kindness, others with caution. She was troubled, one elderly woman said, placing a gentle hand on Princess's arm, but she was not evil. That stuck with her, in the way her mother had been both the villain and the victim of her own story. And maybe, Princess thought, that's what made it all so human. Back in the city, life slowly found its rhythm again. Gide and Princess began to talk more, deeper, not just about the kids or the bills, but about fear, hope, pain. He told her how hard it had been to watch her carry so much alone, and she told him how afraid she'd been that letting go of her past would mean losing a part of herself. They rebuilt their connection in the quiet moments, washing dishes, folding laundry, brushing the children's hair before bed. Nothing grand, just steady love. On a calm evening months later, Princess sat with Zara on the balcony, watching the sunset burn gold across the sky. "Did your mummy love you?" Zara asked suddenly, her voice small. Princess paused, holding her daughter close. "She didn't always know how to show it," she said honestly, "but yes, in her own way, she did." Zara nodded, satisfied with the answer, and as Princess looked out at the horizon, she realized she had carried her mother's memory out of the shadows and into something brighter. Not perfect, but real, and that was enough. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.